Hello, friends. It's been a while. Hopefully I remember how to do this. It's been a while. Like, I have been thinking about filming for 2 weeks and just haven't gotten up the nerve to do it because it's been so long and it's like I almost just don't remember how. I know you just turn on the camera and talk, but it's been a while. Like, I almost feel like I'm new again, even though I've only been gone a couple of months. So as I've said before, and as you've seen in previous videos that were very sporadic over this past entire year, my mental health has been in the toilet, so I haven't been reading that much and just have not felt motivated to make content. But I have read some things, and like promised, I said that I would post or make a video when I have read some things. Some of these things I haven't read. I read back in April. I want to say like April, May. Like, my reading has been so sporadic. So what usually happens is I don't read anything for like 3-4 weeks and I just binge watch TV and I'm busy doing mom things and working. And then I just get a wild hair at my ass, usually from Cassidy, and I end up reading, like binging a series or reading like 3 or 4 things. And then I just stop. And right now I'm kind of in that I just stop-ish. Like, I want to read, but I'll get there anyways. So I have read some stuff. One of the books I actually own physically and it's over there, but I'm just not going to grab it because the books that I read like back in April, I don't really have that many thoughts on, nor do I remember enough to give a valid review on, which again, this brings up the fact that I haven't filmed in 3 months. And if I actually did in a timely manner, like I used to, I would still have like my thoughts fresh in my head and I could actually do this properly. But I don't because I'm a trash panda. So again, apologies. And I should just name this video, This Is All Cassidy's Fault, because most of these things I read was because of either Cassidy or Mel. So you can thank them for the content, I guess. So I guess I don't really have any updates other than I'm going to try, which I say every time, to be more consistent and film when I have read enough to where I can talk about things. Because again, I don't expect my reading to like pick up at all. I'm currently in script jail, so which is very frustrating because I use Scribd a lot for my audiobooks and that's how I read mostly now, is through audio. I don't have the brain power to read physically. It's like in my elderly age, I'm going to be 39 in 2 weeks. So in my elder age, for some reason, my attention span is shit, and audio is the only way I seem to be able to focus and actually get shit read. And most of the time, it's a really calming experience for me because I've mentioned multiple times that when I'm really anxious or, you know, something's bothering me, I can't read. Like, I just can't focus to read. But the listening to an audiobook now reminds me of being in like 3rd through 6th grade, maybe, where you would get independent work times. So your teacher would be like, oh, just work on whatever work we're working on. And they would sit at the front of the class and read a book to us. And that happened to me all the way through 6th grade. I distinctly remember my 5th and 6th grade teacher. I had the same teacher for 5th and 6th, sitting at the front of the class, and we were all doing independent work and he was reading a book, and I don't remember what it was called, but I do remember what it was about. All those years ago. I was in 6th grade in 1995. So like all those years ago, I remember the story beats. I just do not remember the name of the title of the book or the author. I just remember the story, most of the story. So for me, listening on audio, it brings me back to that. Like, I do color by numbers on my tablet, play games on my phone or whatever. And I just feel more absorbed into the story. And it's easier for me to get past that stumbling block of the first like 100 pages where you're trying to orient yourself in the story. And then, you know, so I can get past it. I just listen and I just get really immersed to the point where when my children interrupt me, I get angry about it. So it's working for me. But because of that, I'm in Scribd jail. I've listened to a lot of books on Scribd lately, and all of the books that I want to read next are now not available till July 2nd. Well, that doesn't work for me because it's, you know, we still have like a week and a half left of June. This is bullshit. So, and I don't like to spend Audible credits unless I absolutely have no choice because it costs so much money for Audible, and I don't want to waste credits if I don't have to. And my library is okay. I live in a very small town, so my library is very limited. Like right now, I'm in a fantasy romance mood and they have like nothing. Like, they only have what you would consider popular fantasy romance, like, which isn't really much. Like, they have like the ACOTAR series, like they have all of Sarah J Maas, stuff like that. but since I'm using Libby to get to access it, I don't even think they have any in physical or many in physical, because I've been in the adult romance section and it's more like Regency romance and like the mass market, you know, paperbacks with Fabio on the cover. They have romances more like that. Granted, I live in a small town that has a higher elder population. Not that you have to be older or like, you know, in the elder population to read that kind of romance. That's not my kind of romance. I like fantasy romance. I like heavy smut. I like monsters. I like, you know, I like a plot with my romance, not where just the relationship is the plot. So my library doesn't do well unless it's like mystery and thrillers I can get. Like those are pretty easy to get. Like high fantasy, a lot of the time they have a lot of high fantasy, popular high fantasy. They just don't have a lot of what I'm into right now. So, or what I feel like reading right now. So my library's not that much of an option. So I'm kind of struggling right now, like trying to get to July 2nd to where Scribd lets me out of jail. I can still listen on Scribd. It's just a lot of backlist stuff, and they took away, like, I was interested in starting this one fantasy romance series, and they took those away and put them in jail, and then took, like 7 other books that I had on my saved list. Some of them had been there for quite a while, like months to a year, and they moved them and got rid of them and put them in jail, which is annoying, very annoying, but here we are. So I guess I should get into the books. And now I'm trying to remember everything that I fucking read in the past 3 months. Okay, there's quite a bit here. I'm going to try to breeze through as many as, well, let's see, how many do I have? I guess I have 11 that I've read in the past since April, I believe. Not too bad. I'm not counting the ones that I DNF'd because they don't really count. I have nothing to say about them. So we'll get into it. I'll try to make this as fast as possible. So the first thing I read, which is one I have a physical copy of, I was kind of in a true crime-ish mood. I just was trying to, I wanted to listen to something that I didn't really have to think about. Like, you know, that sounds bad, but it's just something easy. And I'm a true crime freak. Like I watch a lot of true crime. I think I've watched every single show on ID Discovery. So I decided to read Escape by Carolyn Jessup, which I'll have to put a picture on the screen, which, you know, even though I could hold up the book, it's over there. This is, you know, I love cults as well. And this is definitely a cult story. This has to do with Warren Jeffs and the FLDS stuff that has happened. She was not one of Warren Jeffs' wives. She was just a part of the FLDS, and it talks about her growing up in the sect and as she got older and the abuse she suffered and all that stuff until she leaves and where she's at now. And it was good. I don't remember if I even rated it because it's hard to rate somebody's story, but her story is pretty insane. And it was really good. It was a nice, easy listen. It was just something to kind of get my reading jump started. So, I mean, if you're interested in cults like I am, I will read or watch anything to do with cults. I find cults very fascinating because for me to think about how somebody can be in that headspace to believe some of the shit that they believe to get into these cults blows my mind. So I'm always interested in cult stuff. So I figured it was kind of a nice, easy way to kind of try to ease back into my reading. So again, didn't rate it, but it was a decent read, and it was not, I mean, I did learn some things that I didn't know previously from watching documentaries because she actually lived it. And like, it was more about how the family structure was like in a family and how things were run between like the sister wives and with the children and stuff like that. And that part was pretty intense because you don't really hear about a lot of that. You hear a lot about the pedophilia and the other bad stuff like that Warren Jeffs did, but not like the actual families outside of him and how they lived. And it was awful, but it was a good read. Okay, after that, I read A Touch of Light by Thiago. I'm not going to attempt to say his last name because I don't want to butcher it. This is one of Cassidy's favorite books, and she was just talking about it. I think other people were reading it. I don't know if Cassidy was rereading it. I don't remember. This was back in like April, I believe, during her readathon. But I decided to read it. I was like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'd been looking at it for a while. I listened to the audio, and I remember bits and pieces of this. But the only way I can describe this book is it's a chaos tornado. And I remember saying that to Cassidy and she thought it was the perfect description. Chaos tornado. There's so much going on. You follow three perspectives now? I know there's at least 2. I believe there's 3. See, and I just can't remember because there was just so much going on. Like, it's a fantasy. It's a higher fantasy. It's got like a zombie trope in it, kind of. it's just hard to describe. It's very medieval in the way it's built up. There's a religion base to it. Like, different parts of the world worship different things, and there's like a war going on, but it's not a war. It's like a virus, and this virus is kind of like a zombie virus because you encounter people who've been infected and like what it does. And then you've got a female perspective, and you're following the perspective of a male who's a prince, but he's not he is, but he isn't. Like, his older brother was the one that was supposed to lead and take over, but he passed away. And so now it's like on him, and there's a lot going on. And you have a girl on the other side of the world, and she's got something else going on. And as you can tell, this is a really terrible description. And because I don't even remember their names. I read it in the beginning of April, and I gave it 4 stars. I remember really liking it and enjoying it. It was just insane. Like, I would have to almost do a reread before I continued because I don't remember much. Though I'm pretty good at starting another book in the series after it's been a while since I read the first and being able to remember as I read. But to actually do a coherent review, I don't remember shit. So I just remember that I loved it. It was chaotic because there was so much going on, and it gave me whiplash at the end. But it was good. It was well written. It's just not a book I would read if you're starting out in fantasy because you're just dropped into the world. There is world building, but it's not explained to you. Your hand isn't being held. So I wouldn't read it if you're not experienced in the fantasy genre, especially higher fantasy, because you will probably get lost. But I gave it 4 stars. It was really good. I do want to continue. I'm just not sure when that will be. But I do want to continue, and it was good. And Cassidy was happy that I liked it. I was texting her through it. She's like, just don't tell me if you hate it. And I ended up not hating it. So 4 stars. Next, I was on Kindle Unlimited, and I was kind of dicking around because I was kind of in a horror mood. And I found, hopefully I can find a picture of this because it's a Kindle Unlimited. I believe it's self-pubbed. This is obviously a pseudonym, I would assume. But this was under the horror category, and they're very short books. So I think the series is up to 6 now, and they're about under 200 pages or right around 200. I think the most is like 250. They're pretty short books. But I read the first one, which was The Asylum Confessions by Jack Steen. So this author, it has to be fake. This isn't real, but he works in a psychiatric facility. And he's a nurse, and he works on the floor where the patients come to die. So he doesn't work in the wards where they're just roaming around and getting therapy and doing whatever. When they become deathly ill and they're about to die, they go up to his floor, which I kind of thought of it as like the ICU of the psychiatric facility. The way it's described, it almost sounds like those old like 60s asylums, but it's supposed to take place in present day. And he is somebody who they know gives deals. So if the killer or whoever, the person there, gives him their life story and gives him something that wasn't told in the news or in court or whatever, something extra, then he'll make their death easier by either doping them up with pain meds so they go in their sleep, or assisted suicide, that kind of thing. So as each chapter is a patient that comes up, and you listen to their story. They tell their story to him. So in their chapters, it's like almost like parts, I guess, part 1, part 2. But like in their parts, the POV alternates between Jack, the nurse, and most of them are all killers, and the person that's dying who has the issues. And so they tell their story or a part of their story. And it was really fun to read. It was a super fun read. And I think there's at least 4 stories per book. Some of them have 5. They're short and sweet, each one. And there's multiple ones, and some of them are themed. So that makes it, I haven't read further. I think I started book 2, but some of them are themed, like with the killers are kind of themed. This one had the one with this girl, I forgot what he called her. And a lot of times he calls them by a nickname and not their actual name. So you as the reader won't know who they are, though some of them you might know. And at the end of each book, he says, now I'm going to my favorite bar. So if you figured out who I am, come meet me at the bar and I'll buy you a drink or whatever kind of deal. So it's kind of like a breaking the fourth wall at the same time. It was really good. And those stories were pretty interesting. The one was just so fucked up. Trigger warnings for like literally everything. Because there's one story that mimics the Ken and Barbie killers, which I'm sure, like, they have I think it's on ID Discovery. I know it's on Amazon Prime. They have a documentary about them where I think they're from Canada. But they were like, looked like Ken and Barbie. Picture perfect, beautiful couple who kidnapped and murdered women for funsies and sexual pleasure. So like there was somebody in the stories that was the male of the male and female, like Ken and Barbie killers. And he called him Ken and called her Barbie. So it was like that, you could see the similarities there. There was one with a woman who, like, that one was sad. Like that one was more where he felt for that patient and like understood why she did what she did because of all the shit that she had been through. I highly recommend it. It's a fun, quick, like, would be good for, you know, a 72-hour readathon, quick, easy reads. They're not blow your mind, like, super scary horror. It almost runs the line of horror and true crime, and I just really loved them. It was a fun, quick, easy read, and I liked his narration in that he really doesn't like most of them and thinks they all deserve to die, and some of them he's excited for when they get up there because he really wants their stories. It was really fun, but I would recommend it if you need something quick and easy that's kind of in the horror arena to try. I believe I gave book 1 3 stars because, I mean, it wasn't fantastic. It wasn't horrible, but I enjoyed it. Okay, now we're getting into like my fantasy romance era, and this started in mid-May. Again, we'll blame Cassidy and her Discord, but everybody was reading The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. So I had seen this on KU to be able to read, and I was just kind of like, because it's got the blank and the blank and blank, like, you know, kind of like A Court of Thorns and Roses, and like, you know, that kind of titling where it's just like, okay, it's just going to be another ACOTAR. Okay, you know, they're all kind of the same formulaic. So I just kind of breezed by it. But Cassidy and her Discord are reading it. Mel was reading it. So I was like, all right, I'll jump on the train and we'll see. And they had the audio for books 1 and 2. So I read it and I loved it. I think I gave it 5 stars, or was it 4? I'm really stingy with my 5. Let me see. I think I gave it 4. No, I gave it 5. I lied. I gave it 5. I gave book 2 4 stars. So I read all 3 in the series so far. This whole thing, it's the Kingdom of Nyaxia, I think. And it's supposed to be, I think she said like 6. I think it's supposed to be 6 books, but each set is a duology. So I read Serpent and the Wings of Night, and then 6 Scorched Roses, which is a 1.5. And then The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, which is Crowns of Nyaxia number 2. So, and that is a completed set. So then the next book, book 3, will follow a different couple in the same world, and 3 and 4 will be theirs, and then they'll do a 5 and 6. So this is a fabulously written book. Carissa Broadbent is like, her prose is just so good, especially for a fantasy romance. So let's see, how can I explain the premise of this? So this follows Aurea. She is a human who is born in a world where vampires and humans coexist. The vampires are like top tier and they run everything, and the humans are pretty much like cattle to a degree. I mean, they do have their own like human districts that they live in and they can function, but none of them have really any money or status. They're all rather poor, and a lot of times are just picked off by vampires for fun, even though they're not supposed to. And when she is a tiny baby, she is taken in by the Vampire King, one of the Vampire Kings, because the vampires are separated into 3 separate, or is it 4? I think it's 3 separate, like, tribes almost, or clans, like, where there are different types of vampires. And she's taken in by the most powerful Vampire King and raised as his ward, pretty much, and raised like his daughter, and trained from a very early age to protect herself because, you know, she's human, she's weak, she's vulnerable, and he raises her as his own. And then as she becomes, I think she's like 19, 20, there's a tournament that happens where you can enter, and whoever wins a wish for, it's like a Hunger Games-esque, like fight to the death until there's only one left. And whoever wins gets to get wins a wish from their goddess, who is the goddess of death. So, of course, Aurea enters this tournament because she's hoping to wish for power so that she can align her power with her dad, because she calls the Vampire King her father, to align her power with her dad so that they can then be more powerful and kind of be a team. So she does this. Along the way, she meets Rain, her love interest, who is from a different vampire clan, but they have to kind of be allies. So this becomes enemies to allies to friends to lovers. And I really, really loved it. It does get spicy. but not until the end. Carissa Broadbent isn't like smut, smut, smut everywhere. So much plot and world building and getting up there. Very, very slow burn until you get like, I mean, they didn't even like kiss or anything like that until when there's only like 200 pages left or something like that. It was way far into the book, like quite a bit. I liked the tournament aspect. It was okay. Like, it was fun. The whole book was fun. It was fast paced, easy to read. The ending of book 1 gave me so much whiplash. I'm like, what the fuck? What the fuck? Like, I'm in the Discord going, what? And like freaking out. And everybody was loving it who had already finished, because like you get whiplash. It's like twist, 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 twist. It was really good. And she really, really navigates the topic of grief very well. And that's kind of, she always has, which I've noticed in her books since I've read 6 of them now, that there's always an underlying current of some kind of theme that is more important than the fantasy that you're reading. And this one was grief and how to process and deal with grief. And she did it very, very well. Did it annoy me sometimes? Yes, but it was not, I mean, there's a lot of betrayal and loss, and it's, especially with Aurea, and it's more of her processing her grief and how to deal with it. And you hear about her talking about it in her head. She talks about it with other characters. It's done very well. And for somebody who doesn't like books about grief that often, and I loved it, says how well she did it. Because books about grief that deal with grief, to me, I don't find, which sounds terrible, but I just don't find them very intriguing or enthralling. They're kind of not overdone. I just get bored. Like, I don't like sad books. So it's like, if you're dealing with grief, I don't want your sad sobbies. I don't. Like, I want action, and I want like fucking, and I want like, you know, I want Mia. Deal with your grief and your anger by murdering everybody. That's better than sitting in a corner crying and talking about it. While that is the more healthier way to deal with it, is to cry and talk about it and process. I would prefer you process it by stabbing people. So, and I mean, Aurea does that a little bit, but she does do a lot of talking and processing. And so, I mean, that is done well and very healthy. So Carissa was very good about that. Even though it's not usually the way I like grief to be handled, because I'd rather it be more violent. It was very, very well written, and I absolutely loved it. And then I went right into the 6 Scorched Roses, which is a 1.5, which does not have your 2 main characters in it. It takes place, I believe, right after book 1, or maybe towards the same time as the end of book 1, and it's in another part of the world. So, I think it's important that you read this before you go into book 2, because you meet 2 characters that are in book 2. I mean, you wouldn't have the context, I guess, because these 2 characters meet and stuff happens in the 1.5, so that when you go into book 2, you would have the context of how they got together, what the relationship is like, because while they are side characters in book 2, it's nice to have the history. And I agree, like, yeah, everybody was pushing me, make sure you read the 1.5, and I did, I think, like, in a day, because it's a novella, and it was nice and easy. And then I went right into book 2, which I gave 4 stars, I believe. The Ashes and the Star Curse King was not, no, I did give it 5. God, I'm lying all over the place. Gave both of them 5 stars. Book 2 almost got a lesser rating, because there was stuff in the middle that I wasn't a big fan of, but or I guess a quarter of the way through. And then once it started moving and picking up, I didn't find it necessarily predictable, because there was some stuff that surprised me, but other stuff that did not. And I really, really loved it. The whole series, like, I feel like I'm talking really incoherently because I haven't done this in so long. But if you're going to read Carissa Broadbent, read Serpent and Ashes. That duology is the best, because, and I say this because right after reading those, I had like 2 weeks off of not reading, and then went right into the War of Lost Hearts trilogy, and I read them back to back to back. So that's Daughter of No Worlds, Children of Fallen Gods, and Mother of Death and Dawn. I went boom, 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 read those 3. And I really didn't like them. I mean, I did, but I didn't. Book 1 was 3 stars, book 2 was 4 stars, and book 3 was 3 stars, but it was a 2.5 that I rounded up to a 3. So I guess on average, the series was probably more like a 3 star. But let me see if I can explain this. So I decided after finishing Serpent and Ashes, I was like, oh my God, I love Carissa Broadbent's writing. I've never seen anybody write fanro like this. I mean, I have some favorite fanro authors, but like hers was just, it felt like a high fantasy story with smutty romance thrown in, but it's all slow burn and the smut is in the correct places. It's not like, oh my God, like we're just walking down a road, let's stop and fuck. It's not like that. It was very much worked up to and felt plausible for the story everywhere. Like it wasn't all of her books. It wasn't like we're just throwing it in here because we need smut. So I was like, okay, I really enjoyed her books. I'm going to start the Daughter of No Worlds, The War of Lost Hearts trilogy. And she wrote these before Serpent and Ashes. So I was like, okay, I know this is probably like her first couple of books. So I'm going to kind of give them a little bit of a pass. Cause you know, when you first start out, like you get better as you go. So I read book 1 and it was okay. So this is Tisana and Max's story. And this is a trilogy, obviously. And this takes place in a world where there's humans and fae, but the fae are way over there and they don't interact with humans. And so mostly you just are dealing with humans, and it's kind of confusing because like some of the humans have powers, some do not. There's slavery in this book. So our main character, Tisana, another human country had come over and invaded her country when she was very young, and they either killed or took people they either killed them or took them to be slaves or put them in mines. Slavery is very heavily talked about throughout this book, so that could be a huge trigger for some people. I mean, they get whipped, killed for no reason, like these are violent. And so she's taken as a slave, and she's I think she said she was like 5 or 6 maybe when she's taken. And so she grows up, and I think now she's like 21, early 20s at the start of book 1. And in her perspective, and she's with her slave master. And so it's Tisana's story is all about escaping. Like she really wants to escape, and she does very early on. This is not a spoiler. I mean, this happens in like chapter 1, chapter 2. She escapes and goes to the biggest human country, and she's trying to get to, I can't even think of what they call it. It's almost like this castle, like huge building where all of the people with magics practice and get trained and all that, because they're like a separate entity that are supposed to have no allegiance to any of the human countries. They're just supposed to help when needed to either resolve conflicts or whatever. And so she goes there and, you know, like half dead on their doorstep, and was like, help me. So they nurse her back to health, and she does have some power. And they're like, okay, well, you're obviously clearly untrained. Most trainees start out when they're like 6, 7, 8 years old. You are like 19, 20, but we'll give you a shot. Thinking she's probably not going to go anywhere, they take her out into the middle of nowhere to this little cottage where Max lives, Max Antarius, and he used to be one of them. I want to keep calling them mages, but they're not mages. I can't remember what term they use to call them. But she takes him out there and is like, you're going to train her. And he's just like, ugh. Like he's one of those, like, it's kind of Grumpy Sunshine in book 1 because he's really grouchy. You can tell he's got a past. He doesn't want to train her. He wants nothing to do with her. And there's a language barrier. She is from a country the country she's from, she doesn't even remember that language. But the country she was raised in as a slave, she speaks that language. So when she gets to this country, they speak a different language. So she knows bits and pieces. So in Tisana's perspective, it's kind of broken English, you know, because she's trying to speak a new language and she's learning it and trying to discover new words and what they mean while training with Max. And so Max reluctantly agrees to train her, and they slowly start to develop a relationship. And it's a friendship to lovers, I would say, like kind of, you know, student teacher, but you know, it's not like creepy age gap, mentor mentee relationship. It was fun to watch it develop, but in that first chunk while they're training, it's kind of boring. Nothing really happens. But you start to learn about the humans who do have powers, and every single one of them have something different they can do. It's just dependent on certain things. Like one of Max's good friends, he's like a healer, so he can control muscles and bones. So like in war, he's really nice because he can just sit there and go like this and like make like the lungs seize up or something like that. So people just drop, and then he can release them so it doesn't necessarily kill them, or he can twist their bodies into knots without ever touching them. But on the flip side, he can heal. So if you're badly injured, he can heal you. So you learn about the different people, and there's like the political structures. It's a very political, this trilogy is very, very political. And I enjoyed book 1, kind of. I was kind of bored, but I was intrigued by the story and where it was going. Book 2 I found to be much better, more action-packed. Stuff was happening. I apologize if you could hear my son. I had to go shut the door. But yeah, book 2 is more action-packed, more engaging. You get more of the world building. You get some of the Fae start to come in, so you get a little bit more of a Fae story. You get a third POV in book 2, because in book 1 you get Tasana and Max, and then you get a third POV in book 2, and like trying to figure out who it is. I figured out easily who it was, because I can't spoil it, because there's something that happens in book 1 where I was like, oh, I think I know what this is. Like when we get to book 2 in that third POV, and I was right. Book 3, it's like, by that time I was tired of it. I was starting to get bored, because there's like this war that's happening, but it felt like it dragged on too long. And by the time I got to book 3 could have been 300 pages less than what it was. It dragged on so fucking long. I was so bored. I was like, okay, like I could feel myself zoning out, and I was just like, ugh. And I started to hate Tasana, who's the main character. She's very single, one-minded. And again, with Carissa Broadbent and her like underlying like major themes, this one was more about morality and doing the right thing and knowing what the right thing is. And like sometimes like good intentions doesn't always mean it ends up well, and that kind of thing. And it was really good, and I enjoyed it. That theme. But I guess this is kind of mild spoilers. I don't think it's very spoilery, but mild spoilers. So Tasana's big focus is that she wants slavery to end, which is a great thing. I mean, she was raised in it. She was almost killed multiple times. She was raped, like all these things. So she wants slavery to end, and she wants to free all of the slaves in this country that has the slaves. The thing is, it becomes her entire personality. Like, if you were to remove that want of her to want to, like, abolish slavery, she would literally be as boring as a board. She has nothing else besides that as her sole focus. While it's a great thing to be focused on and wanting to do, I wanted more from her than just, we have to stop slavery. Okay, you're the main character. You need to have a little bit more depth. While her love interest, Max, adored him. Like, he was so fully developed. Like, you get stuff from his childhood and, like, all the way up. And you could see his growth. And he was my favorite. Like, I enjoyed reading from his perspective. I liked him. He was my favorite. And then I think the audiobook narrator had something to do with it. Because when Tasana would get really upset, like, she would make her voice so high and squeaky to where it was almost like, ow, like, ice pick, stop talking. So I think that kind of contributed to it. Like, I didn't like her whininess. And she also started to fall into the martyr trope in book 3. Like, just go on without me. Like, I'll just sacrifice myself. And there was another trope that I fucking can't stand in book 3 that resolved not as fast as it should have. But when that trope came up, and then I was like, oh my God, here we go. And then she dropped into her martyr. She's like, oh no, I'm just not going to make it, just keep going without me. I'm just going to, we'll just pretend like that never happened. And oh my God, I was like, no. Like, she was so fucking annoying by the end. And that's another reason why I ended up giving it like 2.5 stars. She pissed me off. And the ending was underwhelming. It wasn't as, I love the ending of Serpent and Ashes, Serpent and the Wings of Night, and the other one, the second one. Those two like both had satisfying endings. This one was just so underwhelming. I was bored. I was like, okay, that's it. That's the ending. Woo. And there's 2 characters that are considered villains. And I wanted to know more, because there's a male and a female villain. And the female villain, I wanted more of her backstory a little bit more, and to be in her head a little bit more, because I think her journey was more interesting. Whereas the male villain, like, I knew why he was doing what he was doing. That was very well explained. So, and what happens to both of them, I thought he got a better ending. And what happened to him, like, that was fitting. I actually liked the way that ended. But with her, it was almost like a blink, and I didn't like that. I thought she deserved a little bit more, being an antagonist since literally almost book 1. So that trilogy as a whole, if you're a Carissa Broadbent fan, I would recommend trying it out. Like, I think Cassidy's gonna like it way better than I did, but I think her and Mel have a better chance of liking it than I did, because the one trope that I couldn't stand in book 3 may not bother them like it bothered me. It's one of my most hated tropes. So, I mean, it was going to affect my reading experience in a way. I don't think tropes are spoilers, but some people do, so I won't say what it is. As a whole, I guess the trilogy is 3 stars. Not my favorite. I would recommend it to people who already like Carissa Broadbent, but I would recommend reading Serpent and the Wings of Night first, because I think that is a better representation of her as a writer, because she's improved so much and that story is just so well done. I think that is better representation than this trilogy that came before, because she's improved since then. So as a whole, 3 stars, but I'm now waiting for her other stuff to come out in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, or Nyaxia, because those were fantastic. And I'm assuming all the rest are going to be fantastic as well. Okay, so the last thing I read, which was 3 or 4 days ago, and I have not picked up anything since, I jumped on the hype train because I've seen it everywhere, and I was like, fine, fuck it. I read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So I gave this book 4 stars, which was surprising to some. So I knew I had low expectations going in. Friends of mine had read it and they said it is not high fantasy. It starts out very YA. It's very tropey, a lot of cheese. So I was like, okay. So I went in with that expectation, very low expectations. I knew there were dragons. I knew that it was probably going to be something fun, but not to take it seriously. And going in with that expectation, it was highly enjoyable. If you go in thinking, oh, this is going to be some great epic high fantasy dragon story, it is not. It is not. It is very comparable to ACOTAR, I would say, in some ways. Like, it starts out very YA leaning, and as you go through the story, it gets more new adult, I would say, because these kids they're not kids, they're college age. They're like 1920s, in that early 20s. So they're not children. They're not teenagers, but they act like it sometimes. So this, if you've lived under a rock and you don't know what Fourth Wing is about, Fourth Wing follows Violet, who lives in a world where there's dragons. Her mom is like the general of the dragon riders. And so she has a physical disability, which it sounds like, how do you pronounce it? Aslos-Danner syndrome. I probably butchered that, where like your joints and ligaments hyperextend, and it can be very, very painful. I know somebody who has it, and it's insane what they can do with their body, but it's very painful. I think I pronounced that wrong, but I've heard of the syndrome before. And that's the way I know the author suffers from what the main character does, what Violet does. But the disability rep was really good, but she suffers from this, and it's not given a name, but it's talked about with like ligaments and joints and bones that they can be pulled and extended and snapped real easy. So it sounds kind of like that. But she is forced by her mother to join the Dragon Riders. So she was going to be a scribe. She'd been studying forever to be a scribe. Her father was a scribe. But her brother and her older brother and sister are both Dragon Riders. Her brother has died, and her sister is a current Dragon Rider. And so her mom forces her to go to the school to be a Dragon Rider, even though she does not want to. And I mean, just to get to the school, you have to cross this parapet that is like very tiny, and it's like over like where you will fall into a river and die, and it's windy and stuff like that. And you have to pass that just to even get into the school. The school is very deadly. You can kill each other at any time except for when you're sleeping, because there's only a limited number of dragons, and the dragons pick you and bond to you. So you're allowed to kill each other in most circumstances to try to be one of the last ones left to hopefully bond to a dragon. Just because you make it to the end doesn't mean you're going to bond to a dragon, but you have a better chance, obviously, if there's less people. I can't remember, like at the start, there's like 200 and something kids or whatever, and then they whittle down. So she goes into the school. There's, an old childhood friend who's a male who is there. And so like, she's like, okay, well, he'll be kind of helpful and watch over me. And then there's the bad boy that she's supposed to stay away from, who, his parents or whatever, part of this rebellion years ago. And so they were killed, and all of the kids of those parents were forced to go into the Dragon Riders, because there's a chance you're going to die before you even get to, where you could bond with the dragon. I'm probably not explaining this very well. So she goes into the school and starts school, and it kind of goes from there. Like, there is some training. You see her like work her way up. I did like that with her disability, there wasn't some magical ability that made her magically better. No, she, in the hand-to-hand combat, she struggled a lot because of her disability, and she found ways around it to make her chances better at beating the person. And I won't say what, because it's not a spoiler, but it will ruin the fun of finding out for yourself. So I really love that. I was like, okay. And it starts out very YA, and you start moving. Of course, there is some really good smut in it, and because this is new adult, and that doesn't come until way later in the book. but you see her develop a friendship and kind of a camaraderie with her wing, and it's called Fourth Wing because she's part of Fourth Wing. There's different like quadrants, and they're all part of a wing. And you kind of see her go through the school and bond with a dragon and like get to that. So there are dragons, and they are fantastic. I love the dragons, and I like their magic. So when a dragon bonds to you, it channels its magic through you, and that's how you get magic. Humans don't have magic inherently. Only if you bond to a dragon and they siphon their magic through you. You can talk to your dragon in your head, and they're always in your head. And the dragon that Violet ends up with is hilarious. He's sarcastic. He's grouchy. There was a couple of times I literally laughed out loud while listening to it because he said there was something happening, and he made this comment in her head, and I laughed. It was so good. But the writing is not the best thing I've ever read. The writing is okay. There's some of the very major typical YA fantasy tropes in there, but they didn't bother me because I expected it. It was, there was some death. There was one death that I was really sad about because, usually in the YA new adult fantasies, everybody survives. And this one, that's not true. But it was fun. I can't wait for the second book. Like, I guess I'm on the hype train. Like, I expected to find it to be like a 2 or 3 star, just kind of like, okay, this is middle of the road. But it was fun. It was brain candy. It was like something like where you didn't have to really think, you just listened to it, and it was just like fun candy for your brain. I really enjoyed Fourth Wing. If you haven't read it yet and you don't mind, like if you're a fan of ACOTAR or Sarah J. Maas in general, you'll probably enjoy it. That's why I'm surprised Becca hasn't read it yet. I need to tell her she needs to freaking read it. I think she'll love it. 4 stars. It wasn't good enough to get 5 stars. Because, I mean, a lot of my friends rated it 5. Like, you either love it or you hate it, it seems. And I'm the one that's like, oh, it was good. I gave it 4. Because it was good. But it wasn't 5-star material. If it wasn't as tropey and not as YA leaning, like basic YA leaning in the beginning, it probably would have been 5 stars. Okay, so that's it. I have been filming for almost an hour. Okay, those are the books that I all read. This was probably an incoherent babble, and that made no fucking sense to anybody because I don't remember how to describe any books whatsoever. Half of these I read like 2 months ago. But yeah, that's everything. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you are watching this and you've been with me for a while and just hoping that I'd put out a video, hopefully I can do this more often and like actually motivate myself to do it and like hype myself up to do it because I'm so out of practice. Please let me know in the comments down below what you've been reading lately. Is there something that I need to pick up like right now that is really good? I really don't care genre-wise except for regular romance. Because I mean, I've got stacks of books and I could branch out a little bit. It's just trying to figure out like where I want to go next. So give me all your recs in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys have been reading and hopefully I'll see you soon.